You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Some of us work 9 to 5s. Some of us are contracted workers. Some of us get to live in the sewers of New York and eat pizza and practice ninjutsu all day. Those are the luckiest of us all. And today, on Systematic Geekology, we're going to talk about the luckiest of us all, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in their classic early 90s film. I am really excited for this. This was one of my favorite movies of my childhood, and I'm ready to get into this. And for today, I'm joined here today by Joe, of course. We are the dynamic duo of SG. Don't let Josh and TJ tell you otherwise. Go on Systematic Geekology's Twitter and let them know that we are the hosts that you like the most. And also, you should go on patreon.com/Systematic Geekology and subscribe to one of our tiers. All right, got the thing out of the way. Let's do this episode. I'm Brandon Knight. I'm one of your hosts for today's episode. I am a seminary student, and recently I've had a little bit more free time in my life, and I have been clocking so many hours on Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's so beautiful. The music is great, and it's just so expansive. And I have to fight this internal urge because I'm one of those guys who has to go do the thing. You tell me, go do this thing. I'm going to just go straight to that thing and accomplish that task. But that's not the point. The point of the game isn't to beat Ganon. That's not the point. The point is to explore. That is the point. And it's been so good to kind of break character a little bit to play that game.
I am Joe. I am a marketer and podcaster and broadcaster. And recently, I have finally been going through The Witcher after a while of people telling me I need to watch it. And it's certainly been interesting. Be on the lookout for an episode on that.
Let's get into that show. Henry Cavill ripped as all get out for that thing. I haven't seen that much of it. So today we're going to be talking about a movie I like, but let's just break character here for a second. Let's break fourth wall. Day 1, Joe. Can we do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Day 2, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Day whatever we're on, please just let me do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. All right, we get it. You got your horror movie. I got my wrestling, so here we are. You get your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So just gush. Go ahead, gush.
So low key, guys. If you don't know anything else about me, you guys should know I am a '90s kid, and low key, I've been pushing for '90s content since I joined the team last year. So, growing up, it was kind of It was emblematic of which generation you were a part of. Generally speaking, you were either a Power Rangers fan or you're a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan. Generally speaking, there wasn't a lot of crossover at that particular time. That's why when the live action show and that time period's iteration of the Power Rangers did crossover, it was such a big thing. But this is a movie that was a part of my childhood growing up. And I just, I look back on it with, it's funny how the certain things have aged and different things like that. But to me, it still stands out as one of those movies that feels lived in. It is just from the jump. This feels like a world that has been thought out, kind of in vein of if you heard any of our episodes on Batman. I'm talking about the other character in the room, Gotham City. It's that same deal, right? Everybody, if you know anything about the Turtles, it's that they love to eat pizza and they live in the sewers of New York City. So when you're doing New York City, you know like you have to make it feel like at that particular time that was New York at that particular time. And that is exactly that feels like New York City in all of its grunginess and all of its disgustingness and all of its, neo rockness. That felt like New York City in 1990. And so this movie, I have very early memories of watching through these movies pretty close to when they came out. I mean, we're talking, I was young by this point, so I wouldn't necessarily, like, it wasn't like I was, out in theaters or whatever. I'm, like I said, a 90s kid, not an 80s kid. But they were definitely part of my life growing up for sure.
I fall into a weird subgroup here with this era of 90s content because I'm the tail end of the millennials. So I remember watching these as a kid. We had this first movie on VHS. I've seen the other ones when Kevin Nash is playing Shredder, but Super Shredder, correct. You're right. But not an 80s kid. So I've only seen a handful of those original cartoons, and I wasn't allowed to watch Power Rangers. So I was more of a Cartoon Network kid, even more than Nickelodeon. I was more of a Cartoon Network kid. My childhood was Batman the Animated Series, Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Laboratory, Batman Beyond, eventually getting into the early 2000s with the original Teen Titans cartoon. So that kind of run, that kind of era of Animaniacs, although they may have also been on Nickelodeon at one point too.
They were.
So that is a little bit more of my familiarity. But the Ninja Turtles, there is a group of cartoons from that late 80s, early 90s era that I have been trying to get back into. Talked about on another episode getting more into He-Man because it's just things are blowing up all the time. It's fun. It's weird, or looking at, I just watched all of the original X-Men animated series from the 90s. So the Ninja Turtles are one that's in this group of educate me. Why should I love these characters so much? As a martial artist, I appreciate these characters a lot. I almost like this more than Power Rangers from a martial artist standpoint. But yes.
So for those of you that don't know, one of the things that Brandon and I, it's one of the worst kept secret in the SG community is that, we don't talk about it a lot, but oftentimes if you see one of us, you see both of us on the air.
True.
And one of the things that we have in common is the fact that we are both martial artists. And so that's interesting to me outside of specifically people who practiced things like ninjutsu and things like that, like those kinds of very specific martial artists. I don't normally hear from people that they prefer TMNT just by virtue of the fact that it's blockier. Like by blockier, I mean, we're talking about turtles fighting generally people that look like robots with all of their armor and things like that. And so it's just a lot of heavy blow, I'm putting all of me behind this shot sort of thing. Whereas with Power Rangers, there's a bit more of a fluidity to the karate aspect of it. Almost feels like what ninjutsu should look like when actually practiced out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because I missed a lot of the boat when it came to Power Rangers. By the time my brothers showed up, Power Rangers were fine and you could watch Power Rangers. I couldn't. So I had a little bit more exposure to the Ninja Turtle, so maybe that's where it comes from. I did practice Nimpo Taijutsu for a while, so I do have some ninja training in my arsenal.
Nice.
But yeah, a little bit of martial art talk here. So what is it about this one specifically, this movie now, that is so iconic for you?
So I will go ahead and address the elephant in the room whenever I talk about these kinds of things. You cannot nostalgia's a drug, guys. Like, you know what I mean? It is what it is. There's a lot of nostalgia baked into all of this. But so we talked about the scenery, right? Let's talk about the aesthetic of the characters, of the actual people and the turtles. So when you're talking about early 90s to mid 90s cartoon or video game based IP, you're talking about things like Super Mario Brothers. You're talking about things like Mortal Kombat, which Mortal Kombat is its own conversation for me. That is a soft spot. That's how I have a lot of love for Mortal Kombat, understanding fully well aware of what those movies are and what they really are not. But so to this sits in a gem in and of itself, because if you like the cartoon, then this is probably as close as we've ever gotten to an on-screen adaptation of the 80s cartoon.
Okay.
And this is fun facts. So the puppets, the actual turtles, were created by Jim Henson Studios. Yes, that Jim Henson. And fun facts, that was actually his last film that he was ever associated with, because he died about a month and a half after the movie came out. And so and it's kind of funny. So right before literally the year before this, Batman 89, as we refer to it as, came out. We refer to it as that because it came out in 1989. And so this movie had about a quarter of the budget that Batman 89 did. And they were told, go out and make a masterpiece off of this little bit, you know what I mean? And so basically they spent most of their budget on hiring Jim Henson. And because they wanted to start with the turtles, everything else can kind of be built on. The idea is the turtles. And the puppets are one of the things about that movie that still stands up to this day. It's live action puppets, so it is what it is. It's a live action puppet. You need to be understanding of the fact that that is what you're getting. But once you move past that point, it's probably the best depiction of that I've ever seen, as far as that goes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and honestly, aesthetically speaking, yeah, it's a puppet, but I would much rather have that than those films that came out more recently that have Megan Fox in it.
Yeah,
and it's CGI. No, thank you. I haven't even seen those movies. Maybe they're great. I don't know. But I was visually turned off by how the turtles look in that movie. So I didn't bother. But with these original ones, especially this first movie, they're puppets. And that's fine. Sometimes, like, the more homemade stuff, and maybe this is nostalgia talking because we're kind of leaning into it here. I like that homemade stuff. I would rather have Puppet Yoda on Dagobah than the flipping Yoda in Star Wars Episode 2. Or I would rather have the original orc makeup and design for the first 3 Lord of the Rings films than the CGI orcs in Hobbit. Like, there's something about that more homemade stuff that just, it works so much better.
So I'm going to rapid fire a couple of examples. Even if you don't realize you know this, you probably know this. Does the name Tom Savini mean anything to you?
I've heard of this name, yes.
Okay, so Tom Savini is probably the most iconic horror effects guy that there is.
Okay.
Making practical effects for, you name it, he's had his hands on it from a practical effects standpoint. And there's a reason why all of those effects still last today, because they're practical. There's psychological proof that the eye sees CGI, knows it's fake, and is repulsed by it. And nice. I literally saw half of the that era of TMNT movies that you're talking about with Megan Fox. And I saw half of the first one, and I'm like, nope, this not #not my turtles. Like, this was of the generation that my nephew was super into those movies when they came out. And so that was cool to see that these characters were still getting a chance to live on in some form or fashion. But as far as like what I grew up on, that was a huge downgrade to me, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
And as far as all of these different examples throughout these different versions, if it's high fantasy, if it's horror, if it's these kinds of action movies and things like that, we can all point to a time where things were done practically and they lasted. And then things were done from a CGI standpoint and they are way more, they don't age well, and people are generally more critical of them. I'll be the first one to admit, I grew up on the original 3, and for a long time, the original 3 Star Wars, that was it for me. And the prequels came out, and Yoda's flipping around and doing all kinds of nonsense. No, miss me. I thought all of that was unnecessary. I understand why they did it, but it looked like garbage on a hot summer day. I'm not a fan. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That's not who Yoda is. And so, but that's a whole other conversation. But that I think is probably one of the best secret weapons that this movie has is the practical effects. Before you get to April O'Neil, before you get to Casey Jones, before you get to Shredder and the Foot Clan and Splinter and all of these characters, before you even get there, there's this aesthetic point that welcomes you in, because there's something intriguing to being able to see something that looks like a snapshot from a bygone era. And it does make me feel a little old, understanding that probably the largest majority of people listening right now were not born when this movie came out. My co-host for this for this episode was not born when these movies came out.
You said 90, right?
90 was when the first one came out.
Yep, 94.
They came out.
So.
Fun facts. They came out. Oh, dude, you weren't born. You weren't alive for any of them. They came out in 1 year successions from one another. The first one was a smash success. They said 1 year later, have this one out. 1 year later, have the next one out. They definitely went down in quality, but they still hold a special place in my heart. But yeah, so I think before you get anywhere, or before you go anywhere else, that's what brings, like, if you're looking at, why would I watch this old movie? Why would I watch this when I have all of these newer versions of it? Because it's a snapshot into 1990 New York City. And there's a practical effects standpoint of it that is so immersive that it's very easy to get lost in the suspension of disbelief.
I totally agree with that. And, also going off of that, what you were talking about with the budget, how they spent the bulk of that on Jim Henson, that doesn't surprise me. Again, looking at this from a martial arts standpoint, stuntmen have a very important job. It's not easy being a stuntman or woman.
Yeah.
But stunt workers are cheap. You're not going to blow the budget on. That's always the advantage when it comes to martial art films, is that you're not really going to blow the budget when it comes to the people in the film. Yes, there are Jackie Chan's and Jet Li's and Tony Jaa and Donnie Yen. Like, you've got these other people out there who are they've made a name for themselves. But when you're talking about the cast and all the other just players in the film, just go to a dojo and rent everybody. Hire everybody out for the day. Every martial artist is trained to take a fall, to take a bump, to throw a punch, to throw a kick. Like, it makes perfect sense to say, all right, if we're making a Ninja Turtles film, we gotta nail the Ninja Turtles first.
Yeah, and being a broke fighter in a gym, I'll be the first one to tell you that, generally speaking, trying to get paid for your craft is very difficult and involves getting punched in the face more often than is probably healthy. And so if somebody's coming through and saying, hey, you want to make $50 for the day? just getting on screen and rolling around or throwing some kicks or throwing some punches and doing some things and all of that kind of stuff. I promise you, entire dojos worth of fighters will jump at that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You will have be packed to the rafters with volunteers. Man, for most of them, you could probably give them $20 in pizza and they'll do it. You know what I mean? Just being honest. Yeah. And so, it's a good note to make, because when you're watching this from a martial arts standpoint, those are things that you are going to notice. I don't know how much of you guys listening are fighters, but that is something to note, that if you are coming from it with those kinds of eyes.
For sure. So I don't have too much to say. It's been a bit since I've seen this movie. So just talking about turtles in general, I gotta say, Casey Jones is aesthetically one of the coolest characters out there. I freaking love Casey Jones. And if anything, he's like the antithesis to Jason with the hockey mask thing. He's like, you want to be a bad guy with a hockey mask? I'm going to put on a hockey mask and be the good guy. Like, he's such an interesting character to me. So, but you tell us, where do you want this conversation to go on the Ninja Turtles? You want to talk about Casey Jones? We could talk about Casey Jones.
So for me, part of what I bring to this conversation is I grew up in a household where I was the 90s kid. My sister was the 80s kid. My sister is almost 10 years older than me. And so she was a part of that generation. And so I had an opportunity to be exposed to a lot of the 80s era things. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the cartoon. And I was one of those in-betweens where I loved all of the content, Power Rangers, TMNT, all of it. And so to me, one of the biggest things that I appreciated about this is that each one of these turtles had their character traits that they had in the cartoon. Mm-hmm. So if you've seen the cartoon and never seen the movie, at least the first one is pretty much as close as you're going to get to the on-screen adaptation of the cartoon. And if you've seen the movie but haven't seen the cartoon, then I would definitely suggest the cartoon. Absolutely. And so for me, I don't think especially sitting in my modern day perspective, being a student of geek history, I would be the first one to admit Pastor Will might have me beat for the simple fact of his years in being beat in the very specific things that he likes and things like that. But I would go as far as to say that I am one of the biggest historians of geek culture out of the team. And to me, I think it's important to note that it's the fact that this movie was allowed to have personality and allowed to be the Turtles, like for everything that they are, for everything that they're not, for everything that they're cheesy, for everything that they're campy, for all of it, for the good, the bad, the stakes of it all of that kind of stuff. Because it's worth noting that the 80s cartoon is, there's stakes. There are some Darkest Timeline episodes of that show that get real intense real quick. It was a different time, and they did not play by modern day rules as far as what was acceptable to put on a kid's cartoon. We'll just put it there. And so for that being the archetype, the predecessor, if you will, to this movie, and this being a time where this kind of thing wasn't necessarily taken seriously, for this to be a love letter to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans in the best possible way, it has to be there. It has to be stated, and it can't be minimalized, because that's just simply, I would argue, and some people would even argue with me about this, but I would say that the next closest thing that we get as far as an on-screen love letter adaptation is Mortal Kombat in 95.
I was around for that one.
Yep.
Mortal Kombat 95 is exactly what it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
Being a video game film. I've also seen the Street Fighter film with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and love JCVD, man. It's got too much plot. Simply put, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Tekken, all of those games, it's just people fighting.
Yeah, it's beat 'em ups. That's
other.
it. Doesn't need to be anything more than that. We need a reason for everybody to start fighting, but once the fighting starts, that's all the storyline you need. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's about
all
it.
You need. So, of all the various Ninja Turtle adaptions that have come since, does anything really capture that original spirit? If you haven't seen the most newest Nickelodeon version, that's fine. But is there anything that really gets at that original tone for the Turtles, or is it really just this initial film?
So there is a series that came out in the, I want to say mid 2000s, that it was a cartoon. I think it was produced by Nickelodeon before
TMNT,
Nickelodeon became super sterile. That was honestly the next closest adaptation for me. I because of being a huge fan of TMNT as a whole, that was enough that, yes, I was outside of that realm, but just because I was outside of the key demographic doesn't mean that I wasn't still a nerd. And so I saw a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles show out there. And so I went with it, especially because the last one before that was the live action nonsense and the very reason why, for a long time, you didn't see any female turtles because they really, really messed that one up. So after that, you have this cartoon, and it's the next one after 87 that allows there to be stakes, allows for it to get dark, because you think the 80s cartoon got dark? Ask anybody who's a comic historian on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Ask them what kind of rating they give it. It's mature audiences, 100%, because we're not talking about the big two. We're talking about IDW. We're talking about comic houses that are not known for their family-friendly product a lot of the time.
Right, because didn't it start at Image?
Image, yes.
Did it start at Image? It started at Image, and as a comic book series, and those books are hard to get. First off, I've tried to get them. Those books are hard to get. The art is amazing. I love the art. Well, what?
That's an investment to try and track those down and all of that. But like you said, the art is so second to none on those. Like they're just gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just from the art alone, you can tell this isn't for children. Like there's going to be stakes. There's going to be, not simple resolves to these stories. I'm going to be straight up honest with you, Joe. I have no idea what you're talking about, a live action show. I have no idea. Apparently this is so bad that my very nerdy, geeky, culture saturated brain, this is so bad I have no idea what you're talking about. There was a live action show at one point.
Okay, so in the early 2000s, when Saturday morning cartoons were the thing, when they were starting, when they were really at the right, that was more of an exit because everybody and their mother was trying to over monetize it to the nth degree, and it was basically, the bubble had burst after the 90s, well, I should say the 80s and 90s of basically being toy commercials. You know what I mean? There were attempts at recreating old IP. There was a Sonic show at this time. Power Rangers was had gone into space and all of that. And so they went with a live action TMNT. I want to say it came out in 2003. Might be wrong. But it was, no, I think it came out in the late 90s. I think it came out in 99 or 2000. Okay. Because 2003 was the cartoon. The good one that I had referenced. Sure. But yeah, so this was an attempt to reinvigorate this IP. Live action Turtles, the 3 movies did so well, blah 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 blah, and they created Venus de Milo, the female turtle. And like, it was this weird combination of everybody against everybody because everybody's vying for Venus's love. Nobody's related, but they act as if she's a sister sometimes. Like, specifically, the turtles aren't related. So for those of you that don't know, that's kind of heresy for an old school turtle fan. Because they're brothers. That's just one of those things. You know what I mean? Yes, they're turtles, but they're all from the same, whatever you call a grouping of young turtles. Sure. They're all from the same family. And so that being a thing, that was a huge step in the wrong direction. But they didn't tell any compelling stories. It was all very cheesy. It wasn't well done. The puppets were garbage, especially in comparison to the Jim Henson version. So yeah, it's one of those. Fox had it for, I want to say it didn't even crack 2 seasons. Okay. But their most notable thing was that they crossed over with Power Rangers in space. That was what I was referring to when I said the live action crossover with the Power Rangers. And they're evil for a little bit, and then they get turned back into good, and then they team up to beat up the bad guys and yada yada yada.
Yada. I feel like I think I've seen this female turtle.
So she had familiar. A very light blue head.
Okay.
Very like a lighter version of Donatello's. Headpiece.
I'm gonna have to go look into this. Not for long, but I'm gonna go look into this now.
That's fine.
That's awesome. Okay, so anything else you would like to say on the Ninja Turtles before we start shifting things over to the theology of the Ninja Turtles?
So honestly, this is one of those movies where this is more of a love letter to this movie than it is like, again, a plot synopsis, if you will, because this is a movie that I could sit here and tell you, and it would if I were just to sit here and spit it out, it would equate to, here is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle story. Just like with the Batman, this is a Batman story, is what it really comes down to go through beat for beat what happened in this movie. And so, and there's it so relies on the aesthetic portion of it that would be what I would say, to go see, the Turtles in all of their glory, Splinter in all of his rat glory, which for those of you that don't know, their sensei is a giant rat named Splinter.
The only time, I shouldn't say the only time, but one of the few times in film history where a rat plays the good guy.
Yep. And then there's Casey and there's April and, all of those kinds of things. And so, yeah, honestly, that would be what I would say is if you've seen any of the cartoon, if you've played the games, anything like that, if you've seen this iconic imagery, then this is the movie that brings that to life.
I agree with that. And by the way, if you're part of this key demo of 90s kids and you miss that good old Saturday morning cartoon time, or just cartoons in general from your childhood, every Saturday now, we have a segment on our Facebook. So make sure you're following our Facebook page, where we're highlighting a different cartoon each week. at the recording of this episode, we've done a Sonic the Hedgehog, we've done a G.I. Joe. It's going to be something different every week just to kind of get us all back in that old school frame of mind. Or for some of you younger listeners, you get to see what us old folks used to spend our Saturday mornings doing before they invented TikTok. Would you like to talk about is there any theology that you can maybe pull from this movie or from the Ninja Turtles in general? I'm curious. Give me a good sermon illustration.
Honestly, I think that for this, it comes down to identity. I think that what comes on display a lot of the time is what makes up who you are. Because you're talking about a rat that found 5 turtles, and they were raised to be what they are with the names that they are given, which if you're unaware, each one of them is named after a Renaissance painter. And so that's, so being able to being able to point to something, I would have to say is what understanding what makes up who you are, and understanding that sometimes that changes. You know what I mean? And sure. That is okay.
Okay. Yeah, I like that a lot. Our identity, ultimately is rooted in Christ, but as we go through our own character stories, as we experience life, who we are does change. We change as people, and we all go through a discovery process of who we are. I told recently a story from my college days in the Green Lantern episode we did not long ago. Just kind of like this period of time figuring out who I am, and a lot of that, obviously as Christians, we have to, of course, talk about, being rooted in Scripture and turning to Christ and seeing ourselves the way that God sees us, seeing ourselves the way that other believers see us. Even I have found a lot of healing in my own mental health journey through being surrounded by people who see me in a certain way and wanting to see myself the way that they do. But also just life in general. It shapes us. It changes us. And, will we become Ninja Turtles with Renaissance painter names because all of that goes together? Probably not. Some of you are very lucky, and maybe you have. But we have an identity, and it's changing. And I think it's healthy to continue to grow and change in our identity, I think.
Yeah, I think that there's a layer of it's twofold, right? There's 1A and 1B. 1A is having firm foundation. What is your firm foundation? All of that.
Sure.
But 1B is I am not today who I was a year ago, who I was 2 years ago, things like that. And for me, honestly thinking about it, the Turtles have a not a hard upbringing. Cut that out. The Turtles have a dark past, and they've gone on to be something bigger, something better than their dark past. And that to me is always a compelling story, because I have a dark past and I've become something more. And that, I think, when told well, is a story that translates, whether it's a person, whether it's a guy that dresses up like a bat, whether it's 5 mutant turtles and a mutant rat. You know what I mean? I think that that's translatable from medium to medium.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hey, let's start wrapping this show up. Joe, I don't know why I'm going to ask you what your recommendation is, because I can guess what your recommendation is, but go ahead, tell us what's your recommendation for our audience today.
So I'm going to cheat and give 2.
Fine.
If you are a fan of retro gaming, TMNT Turtles in Time is amazing. It's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. It's wonderful in all of its Nintendo glory, but it's a really, really cool game, especially if you're a fan of the Turtles. And so that would be my first suggestion. And then the second suggestion is probably exactly where Brendan thought I was going to go. The 80s cartoon. It's a little difficult at points to find. It's one of those things that when you talk to people about procuring older content, most people will tell you that they find older content out on the high seas. And because a lot of that stuff doesn't exist in organized, because you're talking about a time before everything was mass produced for republication and all of those kinds of things. So the older you get, the harder you get to find these things. So, but if you are able to find the 80s cartoon of TMNT, I would definitely suggest checking it out.
And I'll go to bat for Joe and say, check YouTube. Like, seriously, that's where we're getting these G.I. Joe episodes, these Sonic episodes to put up on the Facebook page. It's a weird, wacky world. It's the wild, wild west there on the internet sometimes. They're just all there, especially if it's a Hasbro licensed item. It's all there. That's part of their marketing, is that they just put everything on YouTube. There is a channel, the Hasbro one of the Hasbro channels on YouTube just has the G.I. Joe cartoon going 24/7. It's a live stream of all of its goofiness. For me, this might be a little bit more niche, but again, I'm coming at this from the martial artist standpoint. There is a YouTube channel I really enjoy called Art of One Dojo. It's a YouTube channel devoted to just trying to get away from the arguments of this martial art is better than the other and just appreciating the martial arts. Now, the comments will tell you otherwise, but that is the intended purpose of this channel. And they have a segment called Art of One Cinema or something like that, where they do movies, martial art films. The guy who started this channel is a big Karate Kid fan, all the time doing Cobra Kai videos. But they do have an episode specifically on this Ninja Turtle, or 2 episodes specifically on this Ninja Turtle film. It's a lot of fun. It's where I learned about some of this stuff Joe was talking about today, like the Jim Henson puppets and all of that. So it's a cool channel if you like martial arts, if you like martial art movies. Go check it out. Sometimes they do random fun videos like what martial art would be best in a zombie apocalypse. And I'm just going to let you roll with that in your mind for the rest of the day. Joe, where can people find you if they want to hear more?
You can find me on Facebook and anywhere that you find podcasts at either Buddy Walk with Jesus or Kingdom on the Road. I am live on the air 6 out of the 7 days a week, and so you'll be able to find me.
You can find my show, My Seminary Life, where I talk about the stuff I'm studying in seminary right now, wherever you get your podcasts, and on Facebook and Instagram at My Seminary Life Pod. Thanks for listening to our nostalgia-filled 90s party that we've had here today. Cowabunga dudes and all that good stuff. He doesn't say cowabunga anymore, does he? He says booyah now.
Yeah.
Real shame. Cowabunga is so cool. We're bringing it back. Hey, go to our website, systematicgeekology.org, and let us know what you want the catchphrase of the show to be. Should it be cowabunga? Is that how we should end every show? Rather than this way, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.